The Roman-Seleucid War, also known as the Aetolian War, was a dramatic conflict between two powerful alliances in the ancient world. On one side stood the Roman Republic, and on the other, Antiochus III, the king of the Seleucid Empire. The war began after years of a Cold War between these two great powers. Both sought to expand their influence in Greece and Asia Minor. Rome considered Greece part of its sphere of influence and viewed Asia Minor as a protective buffer for its territories. Meanwhile, Antiochus III saw Asia Minor as the heart of his empire and aimed to dominate Greece to extend his power further. This clash of strategic visions grew into an intense rivalry, ultimately culminating in the decisive Battle of Magnesia in 190 BC. Before we dive into the events of this epic battle, don't forget to help us reach 3,000 likes in 24 hours so we can continue bringing you these incredible historical stories. It all started in the late 3rd century BC. Rome had firmly established its dominance over the Italian peninsula, known as the Apennines region, and began setting its sights on expansion beyond its borders. This was not merely a pursuit of additional territory, but a clear demonstration of Rome's ambition to dominate the Mediterranean world. Then Rome's first major challenge on this path of expansion came in the form of the Punic Wars, a series of conflicts with Carthage, a wealthy and powerful maritime state based in North Africa. At the time, Carthage was the preeminent power in the Western Mediterranean, and its interests directly clashed with those of Rome. The most famous of these wars was the Second Punic War, a brutal conflict that tested Rome's resilience and military strategy. Hannibal, the legendary Carthaginian general, became infamous for his audacious march across the Alps, with an army that included war elephants, a feat that struck fear into the heart of Rome. Despite suffering severe losses and facing immense hardships, Rome's unyielding determination and strategic brilliance eventually led to its victory. By defeating Carthage, Rome secured control over the central and western Mediterranean. Having subdued its greatest western rival, Rome turned its attention eastward toward the lands of the ancient Greek world. This region, known as the cradle of Greek civilization, was home to powerful Hellenistic kingdoms that had emerged after the death of Alexander the Great. Among these, the Seleucid Empire, ruled by Antiochus III, stood out as a formidable force. At its height, the Seleucid Empire stretched from the borders of India in the east to Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, and the Levant in the west, making it one of the most extensive and influential successor states of Alexander's empire. The Seleucid Empire was deeply rooted in Greek culture and governance, with Greek serving as the dominant language of administration and society. While local traditions were often respected, the ruling elite consisted primarily of Greek-speaking settlers and officials. This cultural and political structure allowed the Seleucid rulers to maintain control over their vast and diverse territories. Antiochus III, the ambitious king, sought to expand his power more. The way was going through strategic alliances and military campaigns. One of his boldest moves was forming an alliance with Philip V of Macedon. Together, they planned to divide and conquer the territories of the Ptolemaic kingdom, their Hellenistic rival based in Egypt. Their strategy relied on exploiting the weakening state of the Ptolemaic kingdom to expand their respective spheres of influence. For Antiochus, the key target was Coele-Syria, a region of immense strategic importance. By 198 BC, Antiochus had achieved a significant victory in the Fifth Syrian War, securing control over Coele-Syria. This victory strengthened the southeastern border of the Seleucid Empire and ensured that the region would no longer pose a threat. However, Antiochus did not stop there. With Coele-Syria under his control, he turned his attention northward to Anatolia, modern Turkey. His military campaigns there were aimed at seizing coastal territories that had once belonged to the Ptolemaic kingdom. The success of these campaigns alarmed independent cities like Smyrna and Lampsacus. Fearing that Antiochus might soon dominate all of Anatolia, these cities reached out to the Roman Republic for protection. Rome, which had recently emerged as a dominant Mediterranean power, began to take notice of Antiochus's growing ambitions. In the spring of 196 BC, Antiochus made a decisive move that signaled his intention to expand further. His army crossed the Hellespont, modern-day Dardanelles, into Europe and began rebuilding Lysimachia, a strategically located city near the strait. This action demonstrated Antiochus's desire to extend his influence into Europe, a development that drew the attention of the Roman Republic. By October 196 BC, Antiochus met with a Roman diplomatic delegation at Lysimachia. The Romans demanded that he withdraw his forces from Europe and restore the independence of the Greek city-states in Anatolia. They viewed Antiochus's actions as a direct challenge to their growing authority in the region and as a threat to the balance of power in the eastern Mediterranean. Antiochus, however, was not intimidated. He firmly rejected Rome's demands, arguing that he was merely reclaiming territories that rightfully belonged to his empire. He referenced the legacy of his ancestor Antiochus II to justify his actions. Furthermore, he criticized Rome for meddling in the affairs of Anatolia, a region traditionally under the protection of Rhodes in Greek region. The standoff between Rome and Antiochus marked the beginning of an increasingly tense rivalry. By the late winter of 195 BC, tensions between Rome and the Seleucid Empire had grown even worse. The key reason was the arrival of Hannibal, the legendary Carthaginian general. After his defeat and the loss of Carthage's power, Hannibal was forced to flee his homeland to avoid Roman capture. Seeking refuge, he found himself welcomed at the court of Antiochus III in Ephesus, a city within the Seleucid Empire. Hannibal's presence in Antiochus's court was more than just a personal escape. It carried immense political weight. To Rome, Hannibal remained a symbol of fierce resistance and defiance, so his alliance with Antiochus III raised alarm in Rome, as it seemed to hint at the possibility of a renewed threat from a man they considered their most dangerous foe. Despite these concerns, Rome chose to exercise restraint. While some voices in the Senate pushed for immediate action, cooler heads prevailed, and Rome refrained from openly provoking a conflict at that moment. Meanwhile, Antiochus III continued his campaign of expansion, extending the borders of the Seleucid Empire further into Thrace. From Perinthus to Maroneia, his conquests solidified Seleucid control over key coastal areas, providing a strategic advantage in controlling trade routes and maritime access in the region. These gains were a clear signal of Antiochus's ambition to dominate the eastern Mediterranean. However, these actions did not go unnoticed in Rome. The Roman Republic viewed Antiochus's expansion into Thrace as a direct challenge to their influence in the region. For the Romans, maintaining stability in the eastern Mediterranean was critical, not only for trade, but also for securing their alliances with Greek city-states. As a result, tensions between the two powers escalated. This led to negotiations between Rome and the Seleucids to ease the situation. But differences in legal and political views on the disputed territories between Greek and Roman law left all efforts at a standstill. By the summer of 193 BC, tensions in Greece were reaching a breaking point. The Aetolian League, a coalition of Greek city-states and Rome's first Greek ally, had grown increasingly dissatisfied with Roman influence in the region. Once allies in the First Macedonian War, The Aetolians had supported Rome against Philip V of Macedon and helped secure a Roman victory at the Battle of Cynoscephalae in 197 BC during the Second Macedonian War. However, their discontent with Roman dominance in Greece began to fester. The Aetolians saw an opportunity to challenge Rome and sought the support of Antiochus III. They promised to side with him should war break out with Rome, hoping to leverage his power to shift the balance of influence in Greece. Antiochus, eager to expand his influence and undermine Roman authority, cautiously aligned himself with the Aetolians. At the same time, he secretly backed Hannibal's plans to incite a rebellion against Roman control in Carthage, aiming to create a distraction for the Roman Republic. Encouraged by Antiochus's tacit support, the Aetolian League began stirring unrest among other Greek city-states, calling for a united front under Antiochus's leadership. They hoped to rally the Greeks against Roman rule and restore autonomy to the region. The situation escalated dramatically when the Aetolians captured the strategic port city of Demetrius. This was a major blow to Roman power in Greece, as Demetrius was a key hub for trade and military operations. To solidify their hold, the Aetolians slaughtered Roman supporters in the city, an act that further fueled the hostility between the factions. By September 192 BC, the Aetolians escalated their efforts. General Thoantas of the Aetolian League traveled personally to meet Antiochus III, urging him to declare war on Rome and commit his forces to Greece. Convinced by Thoantas and enticed by the prospect of expanding Seleucid influence into Europe, Antiochus agreed. He began preparing for a military campaign to assert his dominance in Greece. The Seleucid Empire mobilized a substantial force for this effort. Antiochus quickly gathered 300 ships to carry out his campaign. The Seleucid fleet arrived at the port of Demetrius. Antiochus quickly focused on securing a foothold in Greece. He forced the city of Chalcis on the island of Euboea to open its gates, turning it into a vital base for his operations. However, his ambitions faced immediate resistance. The Achaean League, loyal to Rome, declared war on the Seleucid forces and their allies, the Aetolians. By November 192 BC, the Roman Republic formally joined the conflict to protect its interests in Greece. Antiochus knew his campaign would require strong allies to succeed. His most promising potential ally was Philip V of Macedon. However, Philip's trust in Antiochus had eroded after his defeat by Rome at the Battle of Cynoscephalae in 197 BC. This loss had forced Philip to give up significant territories and pay heavy war reparations. Now, Philip saw Rome as the more reliable path to regaining his strength. Rome had promised Philip rewards, including new territories and relief from the crippling war payments, if he remained loyal. Antiochus, despite offering potential benefits, could not match the guarantees provided by Rome. This left Philip firmly aligned with Rome, denying Antiochus the Macedonian support he desperately needed. From December 192 BC to March 191 BC, Antiochus led his forces into Thessaly and Acarnania, attempting to consolidate his position. However, the lack of support from Macedon and facing a strong alliance between Rome and local allies made the situation increasingly difficult for Antiochus. Therefore, Antiochus III was quickly dealt a crushing defeat when the combined Roman and Macedonian armies launched a decisive counteroffensive in Thessaly. Within a short time, all of Antiochus's earlier military gains in the region were wiped out, leaving him on the defensive. The turning point of this setback was the Battle of Thermopylae, fought on April 26, 191 BC. Here, Antiochus's forces were utterly defeated, forcing him to retreat quickly to Ephesus in Asia Minor, to reorganize and preserve his remaining army. To turn the tide, the Seleucids devised a strategy to destroy the Roman fleet before it could join forces with the navies of Rhodes and the Attalids of Pergamon. However, this plan ended in disaster. In September 191 BC, the Seleucid navy suffered a significant defeat at the Battle of Carthage. This loss not only weakened Seleucid control over the seas, but also resulted in the loss of key cities along the Hellespont, such as Dardanus and Sestos, which were vital for their strategic defenses. By 190 BC, the situation grew even more dire. Antiochus shifted his focus and launched an offensive against Pergamon, a critical ally of Rome. His army devastated the countryside and laid siege to the capital of Pergamon, hoping to pressure Rome's coalition. However, this plan was disrupted by a series of continued naval defeats. One of the most notable setbacks occurred in August 190 BC at the Battle of the Eurymedon. In this battle, the Seleucid fleet, commanded by the legendary Carthaginian general Hannibal, was defeated by the navy of Rhodes. This was followed by the catastrophic Battle of Magnesia, where the combined fleets of Rome and Rhodes annihilated nearly the entire Seleucid navy. This defeat effectively eliminated Seleucid control of the Aegean Sea. As defeats piled up, Antiochus III attempted to negotiate peace by offering significant concessions. He proposed paying half of Rome's war expenses and agreed to the terms set by Rome at Lysimachia back in 196 BC. However, by this point, the Romans were determined to crush the Seleucid Empire once and for all. The Roman army marched toward the area near Thyatira, expecting to confront Antiochus there. However, Antiochus had a different plan for his final showdown with Rome. He chose the plains near Magnesia and Sipylum as the battleground, believing the terrain would give the Seleucid forces an advantage. Antiochus led his army from the city of Sardis to Magnesia and Sipylum, located about 15 kilometers northeast of Sardis. Upon arrival, he ordered his troops to set up camp and prepare for a decisive battle. This was not the first time Magnesia had been the site of a major conflict. In 281 BC, the Seleucids had won a significant victory at the nearby Battle of Corupedium, which solidified their dominance in the region. Antiochus hoped that the historical significance of this location, where his ancestors had triumphed, would once again favor him. The Roman army at the Battle of Magnesia numbered around 30,000 soldiers, while the Seleucid army had a much larger force, estimated at about 72,000 men. However, modern historians have differing opinions on these numbers, with some suggesting the armies may have had closer to 50,000 soldiers each. The Romans had 16 war elephants, while the Seleucids fielded a staggering 54 war elephants. The Seleucid army was divided into three main sections: the left wing, the center, and the right wing. The left wing, commanded by Seleucus and Antipater, it comprised 22,200 troops, including light and heavy infantry, various archers, slingers, cavalry, and 16 war elephants. The center, led by Philip, the center fielded a formidable Macedonian phalanx of 16,000 soldiers, supported by 3,000 additional infantry and 20 war elephants. The right wing, personally led by Antiochus III, it included 24,700 troops, such as cataphracts, royal guards, archers, light infantry, and 16 reserve war elephants. In the opposite, the Roman army was also organized into three main sections. The left wing of the Roman army was commanded by the ambassador Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus. It consisted of 10,800 heavy infantry soldiers, carefully selected from both the Roman legions. Additionally, there were 4 units of cavalry, each with between 100 and 120 riders. The center of the Roman formation was led by Scipio and was made up of another 10,800 heavy infantry soldiers, both Roman and Latin. The Roman infantry was organized into 3 lines, with the youngest soldiers placed at the front. The formation was more open and flexible than that of the Seleucid army, allowing the Romans to adapt to changing circumstances during the battle. The right wing was commanded by Eumenes and included between 2,800 and 3,000 cavalry. Most of these cavalrymen were Romans, but they were supported by an additional 800 soldiers from Pergamon. In front of the main Roman force, there were 3,000 light infantry soldiers from Achaia and Pergamon, along with 800 archers from Crete and Illyria. The rear guard of the Roman army was made up of 2,000 volunteers from Thrace and Macedonia, who were positioned to protect the army's flanks. Additionally, there were 16 African war elephants, which were considered weaker than the Asian elephants used by the Seleucids. The Battle of Magnesia began in December 190 BC. The Roman army, after learning that the Seleucid forces had moved out of Thyatira, began their march. Over the next 5 days, the Romans advanced toward the Phrygios River, setting up camp north of the Hermos River, about 6.5 kilometers, 4 miles, away from the Seleucid camp. Antiochus, the leader of the Seleucid forces, aimed to lure the Romans into a less favorable position. To achieve this, he sent a cavalry unit of 1,000 men to provoke the Romans. However, the Roman army, known for their careful planning and experience, avoided falling into the trap. They remained cautious and did not leave their secure position. 3 days later, the Romans decided to move their camp to a more strategic location, a horseshoe-shaped plain about 4 kilometers from the Seleucid camp. This new location was surrounded on 3 sides by the Phrygios and Hermos rivers, providing a natural defense for the Romans. By setting up camp in this area, they hoped to limit the effectiveness of the Seleucid cavalry, which needed open space to maneuver and strike with full force. But Antiochus was determined not to let the Romans settle without a fight. He responded by sending an elite force of 3,000 soldiers to harass the Roman camp. Despite the harassment, the Romans, who were experienced in battle and careful in their tactics, maintained their defensive formation. They did not give in to the pressure, sticking to their well-planned positions and preparing for the great battle that was to come. For the next 5 days, both the Roman and Seleucid armies set up their formations, preparing for battle, but no fighting occurred. Scipio now found himself in a difficult position. He could not attack the Seleucid camp directly, as it was heavily defended. However, if he avoided battle, he risked being cut off from his supply lines by the large Seleucid cavalry. Retreating was not a good option either, as it would lower the morale of the Roman soldiers, especially with the winter approaching and the campaign temporarily halting. Scipio also knew that if he didn't achieve victory quickly against Antiochus, Rome would send a new consul to replace him. This would mean losing his chance to make a significant mark in the campaign. To try and change the situation, the Romans moved their position to a spot where the Phrygios River made a sharp 90-degree turn north. However, this new position left the Roman right flank vulnerable, as the river no longer protected it. Recognizing this weakness, Antiochus saw an opportunity to strike. The battle started with a strategic assault led by Eumenes of Pergamon on the Seleucid left flank. His target was the Seleucid war chariots, a key element in their battle strategy. Eumenes deployed a force of archers, slingers, and spear throwers, light infantry units specially trained to pressure vulnerable targets like chariots. The Seleucid chariots were positioned at the front of their left flank and were meant to disrupt the Roman lines with fast, aggressive charges. However, Eumenes' strategy quickly took effect. Continuous volleys of arrows and precisely aimed stones from the slingers struck the horses pulling the chariots, throwing the formation into disarray. The terrified horses bolted uncontrollably, dragging the chariots into the ranks of the Seleucid army behind them. This chaos spread rapidly, disrupting the Arab camel archers and the heavily armored Seleucid cataphracts stationed just behind the chariots. The camel archers, caught in the confusion, struggled to maintain their positions, while the cataphracts, the backbone of the Seleucid cavalry, found their formations broken. Recognizing the confusion and loss of control within the Seleucid ranks, Eumenes acted swiftly. He ordered the Pergamene cavalry, working in coordination with nearby Roman cavalry, to launch a decisive attack on the Seleucid left flank before the Seleucid cataphracts could reorganize. Their combined assault successfully broke through the weakened lines, forcing the Seleucid force to retreat toward their camp. With the cataphracts in full retreat, the Seleucid left flank was left completely exposed. And now they found themselves under attack from two directions, the Roman center and their right flank. The combined assault by the disciplined Roman infantry and the Pergamene cavalry on the Seleucid left created overwhelming pressure. They were quickly overwhelmed and forced to retreat, leaving the left flank of the Seleucid phalanx completely exposed and unprotected. Meanwhile, on the Seleucid right wing, Antiochus III personally led a charge with his elite heavy cavalry, the cataphracts, and the royal guard. His target was the Latin infantry in the Roman army, aiming to break through their lines with a direct and forceful assault. The Latin infantry, lacking the heavy equipment needed to withstand such a powerful cavalry charge, quickly fell back under the pressure. They retreated toward the Roman camp. However, instead of pursuing the fleeing infantry or regrouping his forces to assist other parts of the battlefield, Antiochus's cavalry became bogged down at the Roman camp. This decision proved to be a critical mistake. While cataphracts were formidable in open-field combat, they were ill-suited for attacking or holding fortified positions like a camp. Inside the camp, the Romans quickly regrouped. Reinforcements, including Thracian and Macedonian troops, joined the defense. A Roman general rallied the defenders and strengthened their fortifications. Antiochus's forces, unable to breach the camp's defenses, found themselves engaged in a futile effort that drained their momentum and wasted precious time that deprived him of the chance to redirect his powerful cavalry to other crucial areas of the battlefield. At the center of the Seleucid army, the phalanx formation, supported by elite Argyraspides infantry, held firm against the pressure from the Roman infantry. However, the very strength of the phalanx, its tight and solid formation, became its greatest weakness when faced with the flexible tactics of the Romans. Instead of engaging in a direct assault, the Roman forces deployed archers and slingers at a distance, continuously bombarding the phalanx ranks. Adding to the Seleucid woes was the presence of war elephants integrated into the phalanx formation. These elephants, positioned among the taxius units, were intended to prevent frontal attacks. However, they quickly became a liability under the relentless rain of Roman arrows and stones. Injured and panicked, the elephants turned on their own lines, charging into the tightly packed phalanx and disrupting the cohesion of the Seleucid infantry. Once the phalanx was disrupted by the panicking elephants, the Seleucid soldiers could no longer maintain their discipline or cohesion. The collapse of the central formation became inevitable. Although some phalanx units tried to execute a slow and orderly retreat, chaos spread rapidly under the continuous pressure of Roman archers and infantry. With their formation broken and morale shattered, the Seleucid soldiers began to throw down their weapons and flee the battlefield. What was once a strong and disciplined force turned into a scattered and demoralized crowd, sealing the fate of the Seleucid army at the center of the battle. The Battle of Magnesia marked a devastating defeat for Antiochus III and the Seleucid Empire. Modern estimates suggest 10,000 Seleucid soldiers were killed compared to 5,000 Roman casualties. Following the loss, Antiochus retreated to Apamea, while key Seleucid cities like Sardis and Ephesus surrendered to Rome. Seeking peace, Antiochus negotiated the Treaty of Apamea in 188 BC under harsh terms. He relinquished all territories west of the Taurus Mountains, paid a massive indemnity, and surrendered notable figures like Hannibal. Pergamon gained much of Asia Minor, while Rhodes received Lycia and Caria. The independence of Rome's allied city-states was guaranteed. Additionally, Antiochus had to withdraw his troops from beyond the Taurus, dismantle most of his navy, and provide Rome with annual grain shipments and hostages. This decisive defeat not only ended Seleucid expansion westward, but also solidified Roman dominance in Asia Minor, fundamentally altering the region's power dynamics.
In 197 BC, the rugged hills of Thessaly witnessed a cataclysmic clash between two titanic forces, the adaptable Roman legions and the formidable Macedonian phalanx. Today, we will profoundly analyze the legion and phalanx tactic of the two most powerful ruling powers of ancient times, Roman and Greece, and then delve into one of the most decisive battles of the Second Macedonian War, the Battle of Cynoscephalae. This conflict had a profound effect on the ancient world and signaled the start of Rome's dominance over Greece. It's time to get ready yourself and march into the Battle of Cynoscephalae. Following Hannibal's defeat at Zama, Rome redirected its focus towards the Antigonid Kingdom of Macedon in the eastern Mediterranean. However, even before this pivotal moment, the Roman legions had engaged in a series of momentous clashes with the famed Macedonian phalanx, and this confrontation would continue to shape the course of history. In 334 BC, the legendary Alexander the Great embarked on his historic campaign, crossing the Hellespont with his elite Macedonian army to conquer the vast Persian Empire. From the banks of the river Granicus to the plains of Issus and the decisive battlefield of Gaugamela, Alexander's forces repeatedly proved their superiority over their adversaries. At the heart of Alexander's army was the renowned phalanx, comprised of 9,000 highly trained phalangites known as Pegatai, or the Foot Companions. Following Alexander's untimely death in 323 BC in Babylon, his empire fragmented, giving rise to a period of conflict among his successors. This power struggle led to the establishment of three primary successor kingdoms: Ptolemaic Egypt, Antigonid Macedon, and the Seleucid Empire. These new Hellenistic states inherited the military traditions of their predecessor, relying heavily on the formidable phalanx formation in their warfare. As Rome's influence continued to spread throughout the Mediterranean, the clashes between the Roman legions and the Hellenistic phalanxes would become defining moments in ancient military history. The eventual triumph of the Roman legions over the phalanx marked a significant turning point, solidifying Rome's dominance in the ancient world and shaping the course of civilization for centuries to come. In the theater of ancient warfare, the unforgiving terrain often served as a silent yet formidable adversary, impacting military formations with varying degrees of severity. However, the repercussions were particularly pronounced for the Sarissa phalanx, where the tightly packed ranks of phalangites relied on flat ground to maximize the devastating potential of their forest pikes. In stark contrast, the Manipular Legion, embraced by the Romans as a strategic departure from the Greek-style phalanx, owed its inception to the exigencies of mountainous warfare against the Samnites in central Italy. The maniple's inherent flexibility, capable of bending and stretching as needed, conferred a distinct advantage in rugged terrain, a stark contrast to the phalanx's reliance on open plains for optimal performance. The Battle of Pydna in 168 BC served as a vivid illustration of the contrasting fortunes of these two formations. Initially, on the flat expanse of the battlefield, the Antigonid phalanx asserted its dominance with ease, repelling the Roman velites skirmishers and hastati with minimal effort. The phalangites seemed impervious to the Roman assault, their formidable array of sarissas presenting an impenetrable barrier. However, the tide turned dramatically as the Romans strategically withdrew to the mountainous slopes, enticing the Macedonians to pursue. As the Antigonid forces ascended the treacherous terrain, the cohesion of the phalanx began to unravel, exposing vulnerabilities that the Romans deftly exploited. With their formation disrupted by the landscape, the adaptable Romans capitalized on the opportunity, slicing through the disarrayed phalanx with ruthless efficiency, compelling the remnants of the Antigonid army to flee in disarray. The phalangites of the Hellenistic era wielded the sarissa, a fearsome two-handed iron-headed pike measuring between 16 to 21 feet in length. Crafted from sturdy cornel or ashwood shafts, these spears featured diminutive yet lethal iron heads, aptly likened to little teeth by the Roman poet Gracius. Augmenting their offensive capabilities, the sarissas were equipped with a butt spike for additional versatility. Phalangites donned various types of bronze helmets, including the iconic pilos and Corinthian styles, for cranial protection, while their torsos were safeguarded by linen cuirasses or bronze cuirasses. Clip-on greaves shielded their lower limbs, while a smaller pelt shield offered limited arm protection. Conversely, the Roman hastati, comprising the vanguard of the legion's heavy infantry, adopted a lighter loadout tailored for agility and versatility. Clad in comparatively lighter armor, likely consisting of a single pectoral slab and a lone greave, they compensated with the formidable scutum shield, significantly heavier than their phalangite counterparts. Armed with the iconic gladius sword, measuring approximately 85 centimeters in length, hastati possessed both the finesse of individual combat and the cohesion of organized maniples. Furthermore, equipped with two pila throwing javelins, they seamlessly transitioned from ranged assaults to close-quarter engagements, embodying the multifaceted capabilities of Roman legionaries. As the Roman javelins hurtled through the air in a deadly barrage, they wrought havoc among the tightly packed ranks of the phalangites. Each projectile, when unleashed en masse, forced the Macedonian warriors to abandon their crucial shields, leaving them perilously exposed to subsequent assaults. The relentless onslaught of these missiles not only inflicted physical harm, but also sowed seeds of disarray and panic within the phalanx, further amplifying its vulnerability. In stark contrast, the phalangites, designed primarily for long-range melee engagements, found themselves ill-equipped to contend with the relentless advance of the legionaries once they breached the bristling wall of pikes, rendering their formidable formation virtually ineffectual. Beyond the battlefield tactics, the leadership style exhibited by commanders played a pivotal role in determining the fortunes of their respective armies. Deeply influenced by the cultural and political ethos of Rome and the Eastern Greek kingdoms. In the Hellenistic tradition, monarchs often sought to emulate the heroic exploits of their legendary progenitor, Alexander the Great, by personally leading their forces into battle. From the valiant exploits of Pyrrhus of Epirus amidst the chaos of Heraclea to his fateful demise against the Argives, or the resolute presence of Philip V of Macedon atop the ridge at Cynoscephalae, and the daring charge of Seleucid Emperor Antiochus III at Magnesia, These monarchs exemplified the ideal of martial prowess and personal heroism. However, this singular focus on individual valor often came at the expense of effective leadership within the phalanx, depriving it of the cohesive direction necessary to withstand the dynamic and adaptable tactics of the manipular legion. The role of commanders in shaping the outcome of battles was not limited to grand displays of heroism, but often involved strategic oversight from a vantage point just behind the front lines. Typically, consuls led their forces from horseback, affording them an elevated position on the battlefield and facilitating swift maneuvers to address critical developments. An example of this is, once again, the Battle of Cynoscephalae, where Quintius Flaminius observed his left flank collapsing under the sheer weight of the phalanx. The Battle of Cynoscephalae was a decisive engagement between the Roman Republic, led by Titus Quinctius Flamininus, and the Macedonian kingdom, commanded by Philip V. The battle unfolded in a single dramatic day, with significant strategic movements and tactical maneuvers that highlighted the contrasting military philosophies of the two powers. The day began with both armies positioned on opposite sets of hills near Cynoscephalae in Thessaly, Greece. The terrain was rugged and hilly, playing a crucial role in the battle's dynamics. The morning was shrouded in thick fog, severely limiting visibility and leading to initial confusion. Early skirmishes broke out as Roman scouts and light infantry encountered Macedonian foragers. These skirmishes quickly escalated, drawing more troops from both sides into the conflict. As the fog began to lift, both armies could finally see each other, and the engagement intensified. The Macedonian phalanx, renowned for its dense formation and long spears, sarissas, initially held an advantage in the center. Philip V, confident in the strength of his phalanx, ordered his right wing to advance aggressively down the slopes towards the Roman left wing. The tightly packed formation of the phalanx created an almost impenetrable front line, presenting a formidable challenge to the Romans. In response, Flamininus deployed his Roman legions in a manipular formation characterized by small, flexible units called maniples. This formation allowed the Roman army to adapt quickly to the rugged terrain and the dynamic conditions of the battlefield. The Roman left wing moved forward to meet the advancing Macedonian phalanx. The maniples, moving in a staggered formation, exploited the uneven ground, which disrupted the rigid structure of the Macedonian phalanx. Mid-morning marked the turning point of the battle. Flamininus, recognizing an opportunity, ordered a detachment of Roman troops to climb the hills and flank the Macedonian left wing from the side and rear. This maneuver was crucial, as the phalanx's rigid structure made it difficult for the Macedonians to turn and face the new threat. The Macedonian left wing began to collapse under the pressure of the Roman assault. The Roman maniples, maintaining their flexible formation, pressed forward aggressively, exploiting every gap and weakness in the Macedonian lines. Sensing the Macedonian left was faltering, Flamininus ordered a full-scale attack across the front. The Roman maniples advanced with coordinated precision, their flexibility allowing them to adapt to the battlefield's changing conditions. The Macedonian right wing, initially successful, found itself isolated as the rest of the army began to rout. The phalanx, unable to reform quickly enough to counter the Roman advance, crumbled under the sustained assault. By late afternoon, the Macedonian forces were decisively defeated. The Roman victory was comprehensive, with heavy casualties inflicted on the Macedonian side with around 8,000 soldiers killed and another 5,000 captured. The remaining Macedonian troops fled the battlefield in disarray, leaving Philip V's army shattered. The defeat at Cynoscephalae marked the end of significant Macedonian resistance in the Second Macedonian War. After the decisive Battle of Cynoscephalae in 197 BC, the geopolitical landscape of the ancient Mediterranean underwent significant transformations, particularly affecting both Rome and Greece. The defeat of the Macedonian phalanx under King Philip V at Cynoscephalae effectively signaled a dramatic shift in power. In the aftermath, the Treaty of Tempea was signed, which had profound implications for Greece. Rome imposed harsh terms on Macedon, demanding the disbandment of the Macedonian navy, the reduction of their army to a mere 5,000 men, and the payment of a hefty indemnity. Rome proclaimed the liberation of Greek states, presenting itself as the protector of Greek autonomy against Macedonian hegemony. At the Isthmian Games in 196 BC, Flamininus famously declared the freedom of Greek cities, a move that significantly bolstered Rome's influence and popularity in the region. This declaration, however, was a double-edged sword, as it marked the beginning of a new era of Roman intervention in Greek affairs. While many Greek states welcomed the end of Macedonian domination, they soon found themselves under the shadow of Roman authority. The battle demonstrated the superiority of the Roman military system over the traditional Hellenistic phalanx, a fact that reverberated throughout the ancient world. The Roman legions, with their flexibility and tactical sophistication, had proven their dominance, setting a new standard for military excellence. The conquest of Macedon had far-reaching implications. It not only provided Rome with a strategic foothold in the Balkans, but also opened up new economic and political opportunities. Roman influence in the eastern Mediterranean expanded rapidly, and this victory paved the way for further campaigns in the region. Over the next few decades, Rome would continue to exert its influence, eventually leading to the direct annexation of Macedon after the Battle of Pydna in 168 BC, and the establishment of Roman provinces in the area. The battle was a pivotal moment in Roman expansion into the eastern Mediterranean. It highlighted the changing nature of warfare, where flexibility and adaptability became more critical than sheer strength and rigidity. The Roman ability to maneuver effectively on varied terrain and exploit weaknesses in the phalanx formation was decisive in their victory. The Battle of Cynoscephalae paved the way for Roman dominance in Greece, setting the stage for further conquests and the eventual establishment of Roman hegemony over the Hellenistic kingdoms. See you in the next battle video. Leave in the comment the battle that you want us to go in depth. Please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you for watching. In the annals of history, few battles in history have had the devastating impact of Zama. This conflict marked a violent shift in power, crushing Carthage's ambitions and elevating Rome. In 202 BC, Hannibal's experienced troops faced Scipio Africanus's disciplined legions in a decisive clash that ended the Second Punic War. The defeat of Carthage at Zama led to economic ruin and political instability for the city. Meanwhile, Rome's victory amplified its dominance, setting the stage for a period of expansion and conquest that would reshape the Mediterranean world. So what was the real reason for the devastating defeat of the ancient mighty army of Carthage? It's time to get ready yourself and march into the Battle of Zama to see the answer. Before the Battle of Zama in 202 BC, the historical context was defined by the Second Punic War from 218 to 201 BC, a continuation of the fierce rivalry between Rome and Carthage. The conflict began due to escalating tensions over territorial dominance in the Western Mediterranean following the inconclusive First Punic War from 264 to 241 BC. Carthage, seeking to expand its influence, had established a stronghold in Spain under the leadership of the Barca family, including Hamilcar and later his son Hannibal. The war's onset saw Hannibal undertake one of the most audacious military campaigns in history. In 218 BC, He crossed the Alps with a diverse army, including infantry, cavalry, and war elephants to surprise the Romans. This risky maneuver, fraught with hardships, aimed to bring the war into the heart of Roman territory and incite Rome's allies to revolt. Hannibal's early campaigns in Italy were marked by a series of stunning victories. At the Battle of Trebia, he used tactical ingenuity to defeat a larger Roman force. The following year, he ambushed and annihilated a Roman army at Lake Trasimene. Hannibal's most famous victory came in 216 BC at the Battle of Cannae, where he encircled and destroyed a massive Roman force, killing an estimated 50,000 to 70,000 Roman soldiers. This defeat was one of the worst in Roman history and demonstrated Hannibal's tactical brilliance. Despite these victories, Hannibal could not secure a decisive strategic advantage. Rome refused to surrender and adopted the Fabian strategy, named after the Roman general Fabius Maximus. This approach involved avoiding large-scale confrontations with Hannibal while harassing his forces and cutting off his supplies. Rome also worked to undermine Hannibal's influence among its allies, gradually regaining control over Italian territories that had defected to Carthage. While Hannibal campaigned in Italy, Rome opened new fronts in the war. One key area was Spain, a crucial source of manpower and resources for Carthage. The young Roman general Scipio Africanus emerged as a key figure in this theater. In a series of campaigns, Scipio displayed tactical acumen and leadership, culminating in his decisive victory at the Battle of Ilipa in 206 BC, which ended Carthaginian power in Spain. With Spain secured, Scipio proposed a daring plan to invade North Africa. The Roman Senate, initially hesitant, eventually approved the expedition. In 204 BC, Scipio landed in North Africa and quickly won over local allies, including the Numidian prince Massinissa, who provided crucial cavalry support. Scipio's campaign pressured Carthage directly, leading to panic and the recall of Hannibal from Italy. Hannibal's return to North Africa was a significant event. He had to rebuild his army, integrating battle-hardened veterans from Italy with inexperienced recruits. Meanwhile, Scipio consolidated his position and prepared for the final showdown. The two armies finally met at Zama, approximately 120 kilometers southwest of Carthage. On the day of the Battle of Zama, both the Roman and Carthaginian armies meticulously prepared for the impending confrontation. Scipio Africanus, commanding approximately 35,000 to 40,000 troops, organized his forces with strategic foresight. He arranged his soldiers in manipular formations, creating gaps between the units to counter the Carthaginian war elephants. These gaps were crucial, allowing the elephants to pass through without causing significant damage to the Roman lines. Additionally, Scipio positioned the Roman cavalry, numbering around 6,000 to 8,000 troops, on the flanks to engage the Carthaginian cavalry and protect the infantry's flanks. On the opposing side, Hannibal Barca led an army of approximately 40,000 to 50,000 troops, including a formidable contingent of war elephants. Hannibal arranged his forces in three lines, with the front line consisting of these war elephants intended to deliver a devastating blow to the Roman formations. Behind them stood the Carthaginian infantry, comprising around 20,000 to 25,000 soldiers, and in the third line, Hannibal placed his most experienced veterans, totaling about 15,000 to 20,000 troops. The Carthaginian cavalry, numbering around 4,000 to 6,000, was deployed on the wings to protect the flanks and execute flanking maneuvers. As the morning sun illuminated the battlefield, tension hung heavy in the air. Both commanders surveyed their troops, instilling confidence and resolve. The clash that loomed ahead would determine the outcome of the Second Punic War and shape the destiny of empires. With preparations complete, the stage was set for the opening moves of the battle. Hannibal, eager to gain an early advantage, ordered his war elephants to charge at the Roman lines. These massive beasts, numbering around 80 to 100 in total, thundered forward, their trumpeting cries echoing across the plain. Yet, Scipio was prepared. Roman soldiers stood firm, armed with javelins and other projectiles, ready to repel the fearsome charge. As the elephants approached, Roman skirmishers unleashed a barrage of missiles, while trumpeters sounded loud blasts to disorient the animals. The Carthaginian assault faltered as some elephants hesitated, confused by the noise and commotion. Others pressed forward, only to find their path obstructed by the carefully arranged gaps in the Roman formations. These openings proved decisive, allowing the elephants to pass harmlessly through the lines without breaking the Roman ranks. As the chaos subsided, the effectiveness of Scipio's preparations became evident. The Roman infantry stood resolute, their confidence buoyed by the successful repulsion of the Carthaginian elephants. And meanwhile, on the flanks, the cavalry engagement unfolded with equal intensity. Laelius and Massinissa led their forces with skill and determination, engaging the Carthaginian cavalry in fierce skirmishes. The Numidian cavalry, renowned for their agility and horsemanship, outmaneuvered their Carthaginian counterparts, driving them back with calculated precision. With the Carthaginian cavalry in retreat, the Roman infantry gained a crucial advantage, their flanks secure from enemy attack. The infantry clash escalated as Hannibal's mercenaries and Libyan infantry engaged the advancing Roman legions. Despite fierce resistance, the Roman troops gradually gaining ground against the Carthaginian lines. Hannibal, recognizing the precarious situation, ordered a strategic withdrawal of his second line, comprised of approximately 10,000 to 15,000 infantry. The retreat was intended to regroup and consolidate with his third line of veteran troops, numbering around 15,000 to 20,000, to prepare for a counterattack. The confrontation reached its most critical phase as the Roman legions faced Hannibal's third line of troops, composed of seasoned veterans who had fought with him throughout his Italian campaign. With numbering approximately 12,000, they formed the backbone of Hannibal's defensive strategy. As the battle commenced, the Roman legions, arranged in their manipular formations, advanced towards Hannibal's veterans. The clash was intense and evenly matched. The Romans, numbering around 25,000 in this engagement, pushed forward relentlessly, but the Carthaginian veterans held their ground firmly. Scipio Africanus, recognizing the stalemate, ordered his fresh troops from the rear to advance and reinforce the frontline soldiers. The Roman soldiers, trained in the flexible manipular system, were able to maneuver and regroup effectively, maintaining constant pressure on the Carthaginian lines. At this crucial juncture, the Roman and Numidian cavalry, commanded by Laelius and Massinissa, returned to the battlefield. Having pursued and routed the Carthaginian cavalry, they now attacked the rear of Hannibal's infantry. This maneuver was decisive. The cavalry numbered approximately 6,000, and their sudden assault from the rear created chaos and confusion within the Carthaginian ranks, created a pincer movement, effectively encircling the Carthaginian troops. The relentless assault from the Romans, coupled with the tactical advantage of the cavalry, proved overwhelming for Hannibal's troops. With the Carthaginian forces surrounded, the Roman legions and cavalry launched a coordinated attack from all sides. The Carthaginian veterans, despite their valiant efforts, were unable to maintain their formation and were gradually worn down by the sustained Roman onslaught. The psychological impact of being attacked from both the front and the rear caused many Carthaginian soldiers to panic and flee. The encirclement led to a devastating loss for the Carthaginian army. Approximately 20,000 Carthaginian soldiers were killed, with another 20,000 captured. Roman casualties were significantly lower, estimated to be around 2,500. The disparity in casualties underscored the effectiveness of Scipio's strategy and the discipline of the Roman forces. Hannibal Barca, recognizing the futility of further resistance, managed to escape the battlefield with a small contingent of his troops. He retreated to Carthage, leaving behind a shattered army. His escape marked the end of Carthage's ability to continue the war. The Battle of Zama brought significant political repercussions that reshaped the ancient Mediterranean world. The immediate and long-term consequences of this decisive Roman victory over Carthage altered the balance of power, set new precedents in international relations, and significantly impacted the internal politics of both Rome and Carthage. The most immediate political consequence of the Battle of Zama was the Treaty of Zama, signed in 201 BC. The terms of the treaty were heavily weighted in Rome's favor, ensuring Carthage's submission and significantly curtailing its power. Carthage was forced to pay a substantial war indemnity of 10,000 talents over 50 years, cede all territories outside the African mainland, including Spain, a vital region for resources and strategic military positioning, limit its navy to just 10 ships, effectively ending its capacity for significant maritime operations, obtain Roman permission before waging any wars, even within Africa, which effectively reduced Carthage to a client state under Roman oversight. These terms crippled Carthage's ability to recover economically and militarily, ensuring it would no longer pose a threat to Roman supremacy. For Rome, the victory at Zama and the subsequent treaty had profound implications for its internal politics. Scipio Africanus, the Roman general who masterminded the victory, was celebrated as a hero. He was awarded the honorific title Africanus and enjoyed immense popularity, bolstering his political influence. This victory strengthened the prestige of the Scipionic faction within Roman politics, contributing to a shift in power dynamics within the Roman Senate. The Battle of Zama was a pivotal moment that not only ended the Second Punic War, but also set the stage for a series of subsequent conflicts and transformations within both Carthage and Rome. The political and military repercussions of Zama reverberated through the Mediterranean, influencing the trajectory of both empires in the decades that followed. With Carthage subdued, Rome redirected its military focus to Greece and Macedonia, regions that had become increasingly turbulent. The First Macedonian War, 214 to 205 BC, had ended inconclusively during the Second Punic War, but the conclusion of the Carthaginian threat allowed Rome to engage more decisively in the Second Macedonian War, 200 to 197 BC. This conflict culminated in the Battle of Cynoscephalae in 197 BC, where Roman legions, under the command of Titus Quinctius Flamininus, decisively defeated King Philip V of Macedon. This victory was significant as it demonstrated the superiority of Roman military tactics and solidified Roman influence over Greece and Macedonia. Following their success in Macedonia, Rome turned its attention to the Seleucid Empire under Antiochus III, who had ambitions in the eastern Mediterranean that threatened Roman interests. The Roman-Syrian War, 192 to 188 BC, saw a series of battles, culminating in the Decisive Battle of Magnesia in 190 BC. Roman forces led by Lucius Cornelius Scipio, with strategic guidance from his brother Scipio Africanus, defeated Antiochus. This victory significantly weakened the Seleucid Empire and expanded Roman influence into Asia Minor, establishing a precedent for further eastern expansion. Macedonia remained a persistent challenge. The Third Macedonian War, 171 to 168 BC, broke out when King Perseus of Macedon sought to restore his kingdom's power. The Battle of Pydna in 168 BC saw the Roman legions, commanded by Lucius Aemilius Paulus, crush the Macedonian phalanx, leading to the complete subjugation of Macedonia. This victory was pivotal in dismantling Macedonian resistance and integrating the region more firmly into the Roman sphere. The Fourth Macedonian War, 150 to 148 BC, was a shorter conflict that ended with the final annexation of Macedonia as a Roman province. Concurrently, Rome destroyed the city of Corinth in 146 BC, exemplifying its harsh policy towards resistance and consolidating its dominance over Greece. These conflicts emphasized Rome's determination to maintain control over the Hellenistic world and eliminate any potential threats. Despite the harsh terms of the Treaty of Zama, Carthage managed to recover economically, sparking Roman fears of a resurgence. These tensions culminated in the Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BC. Rome, determined to prevent any future threat from Carthage, laid siege to the city. The conflict ended with the complete destruction of Carthage in 146 BC, its territory becoming the Roman province of Africa. This brutal conclusion eradicated Carthage as a political entity and eliminated a long-standing rival. See you in the next battle video. Leave in the comment the battle that you want us to go in depth. Please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you for watching.
The ancient Mediterranean was the stage for one of the biggest clashes of empires the world had ever seen. Rome on one side, Carthage on the other, each fighting to see who'd control the region. Carthage and Rome had gotten along at first, but as these two powers grew and expanded, it was only a matter of time before conflict came knocking. By the 3rd century BC, Carthage was a true powerhouse of the Mediterranean. Unlike Rome, they didn't have kings or emperors. They had a republic of their own, run by a suffet, one elected each year by the richest families in the city. Power in Carthage wasn't passed down by blood, but by wealth, and that wealth came flowing in from their overseas trade. Carthage had spread its influence far and wide. Northern Africa, Iberia, Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, all under its thumb. Meanwhile, over in Italy, Rome was slowly but surely uniting all the different peoples of the peninsula under one banner, the Roman eagle. The Carthaginians even set up some good old trade routes with Rome, and everybody seemed to be doing just fine. But as history often goes, it didn't stay peaceful for long. The city-state of Messina stirred the pot, going to both Rome and Carthage, offering its allegiance in exchange for protection from invaders. And that was the spark that set the stage for a series of conflicts known as the First Punic War, a bloody brawl mainly over the control of the island of Sicily. Carthage, with its navy and trade empire, figured it had the upper hand, but Rome, determined as ever, pulled off a last-minute victory. Carthage came out of it battered and bruised, with challenges both inside and outside her walls. In 241 BC, a full-scale mutiny broke out among Carthage's mercenaries, and what started as a mutiny grew into a full-blown revolt. Although Carthage managed to crush the rebellion without external assistance, the crisis left it severely weakened. During this time, Rome took advantage of Carthage's internal turmoil, demanding the cession of Sardinia and Corsica, and imposing an additional indemnity. Things got so desperate that the Carthaginian Senate had to swallow their pride, unable to resist, and was forced to comply. In response, Rome sent over grain to feed the starving folks in Carthage, and even released thousands of prisoners from the previous war. These freed men, they didn't sit around for long. They were snapped up by Hamilcar Barca, a man who made a name for himself leading guerrilla campaigns in Sicily. With the people's support, Hamilcar announced he was taking his army west to conquer Iberia, planning to use the riches there to pay off Carthage's war debt and gear up for what he saw as an inevitable rematch with Rome. Carthage wanted time to regroup and get their act together, but facing the threat of civil war, they had no choice but to let him go. For nearly a decade, Hamilcar waged war with the tribes of Iberia, tapping into the vast silver and gold mines in the Sierra Morena Mountains, refilling his war chest with unimaginable wealth. We're talking wealth enough to build an army from scratch, buy the fanciest weapons money could buy, and fund entire wars. Hamilcar had a son, a young firebrand named Hannibal. Hannibal had been on the battlefield since he was 9 years old, gaining loads of leadership experience and commanding a seasoned army. He grew up hearing stories of Rome's humiliation, of Carthage. It's like vengeance ran through his veins. Fast forward a few years, somewhere around 228 BC, Hamilcar was killed in battle, and Hannibal's in charge. And then, in 218 BC, it happened. Hannibal makes a bold move, capturing a city allied with Rome called Saguntum. This was a direct challenge, a slap in the face to the Romans. They demanded Hannibal's head on a platter, but Carthage, well, they weren't exactly eager to hand over their rising star. In a fiery exchange, the Roman envoy declared that he carried both war and peace in his toga, and it was up to Carthage to decide. The Carthaginians, without missing a beat, roared back, choosing war, kicking off the Second Punic War. The Romans thought they had Hannibal all figured out. They assumed he'd come at them from the south, where Carthage had some serious naval strength. But Hannibal, bless his audacious heart, had something else in mind. Instead of sticking to the playbook, he decided to do the unthinkable. March his army over the Alps in the summer and fall of 218 BC, coming to Rome from the north. Hannibal was playing the long game. He knew Rome's power wasn't just about their legions, it was also about their alliances. If he could humiliate the Romans on the battlefield, he might just convince some of those allies to jump ship. And if he could get the Greek city-states involved, that would have thrown a whole new wrench in Rome's plans. Those first few years of the war were tough for Carthage. The Alps didn't offer much in the way of food or resources, so Hannibal had to make do with what little he had. He carefully rationed supplies, sacrificing livestock and even horses to keep his men alive. The main takeaway from this phase is that Hannibal endured tremendous losses, but he did it to gain the upper hand by catching Rome by surprise. This wasn't just about catching the Romans off guard. It was a savvy move to gain a strategic advantage. Sure, the Alps were a risky venture, but they allowed Hannibal to bypass Roman defenses and tap into the support of the fierce Gauls, who had no love lost for Rome. After 15 grueling days in the mountains and 5 months on the road since leaving New Carthage, 26,000 weary, bedraggled men finally emerged from the Alps and onto the fertile Italian plains. Despite losing nearly half his army and most of his elephants, Hannibal had achieved what was once thought impossible. His enemies were utterly blindsided by the threat now looming on their doorstep. Once he reached Cisalpine Gaul, today's northern Italy, his immediate task was to rebuild his army's strength. Hannibal skillfully forged alliances with the local Gallic tribes. Gallic warriors joined Hannibal's ranks, boosting his numbers and giving him vital knowledge of the local terrain. With Gallic support, Hannibal could forage and raid local villages, securing the necessary provisions for his army's survival. The support from these tribes gave him a mobile base to operate from, allowing him to take the initiative against the Romans without having to rely on faraway supply lines from Carthage. Hannibal went on to deal crushing blows to the Roman legions at major battles like Trebia and Lake Trasimene. He even went so far as to tear out his own eye to avoid dying from an infection. After these remarkable victories, Hannibal turned his attention to diplomacy, but with a twist. He began negotiating with Rome's allies, releasing many of his captives while keeping those from Rome itself. His promise was clear. He wasn't there to wage war against the Italian people, but to strike directly at Rome. And he was true to his word. Hannibal focused his raids specifically on the estates of wealthy Roman nobles, aiming to hit Rome where it hurt the most, its economy. By targeting the rich and powerful, Hannibal sought to cripple Rome's financial resources and weaken their resolve. Victories piled up, but victories didn't fill bellies. Hannibal's army, deep in enemy territory and far from Carthage, was running dangerously low on supplies, especially grain, which was crucial for keeping his cavalry in fighting shape. Hannibal's forces were essentially a hungry machine, relying on local resources rather than the steady flow of supplies from Carthage, which was simply out of reach. To keep his men fed and his campaign moving, Hannibal tapped into the resources available in southern Italy. He made a point of capturing Roman supply depots and utilizing the rich lands he was marching through. His alliances with local tribes and discontented Italian communities were crucial, providing not only provisions, but also support for his campaign. Hannibal's approach to foraging was highly adaptable. He moved swiftly and flexibly, avoiding the complications of a cumbersome supply train. However, this constant mobility came with its own challenges, as he had to remain vigilant to ensure his forces didn't run out of food or face starvation. Word reached Hannibal about the prosperous towns nestled in Apulia, southeastern Italy, and he set his sights on Gerunium. This town, small but strategically significant, was a regional breadbasket with massive granaries overflowing with grain. Once he captured Gerunium, it became a key logistical base for his army. He stockpiled vast quantities of grain and other provisions there, ensuring his troops would be well supplied through the winter of 217 to 216 BC. This allowed his forces not just to rest and regroup, but also to prepare for future campaigns with ample supplies. Seizing towns like Gerunium had a dual purpose. It fed his army and struck a blow to Rome by denying them a crucial source of food. Hannibal continued to wield logistics as a weapon, ravaging the Apulian countryside and targeting Roman supply lines and villages. His raids and scorched earth tactics applied immense pressure on Rome, depleting their resources and creating economic strain. The destruction of crops and villages created economic strain for Rome, forcing them to seek a decisive engagement. Hannibal knew they were eager for a decisive battle after suffering a series of humiliating defeats. Hannibal's strategic withdrawals and calculated skirmishes in the lead-up to Cannae convinced the Romans that they were pursuing a retreating and weakened enemy. This misled the Roman commanders into believing they could crush Hannibal with sheer numbers, ignoring the more complex dangers lurking in his plan. Hannibal played on Roman arrogance and eagerness, baiting them into the battlefield under conditions favorable to his tactics. Two new Roman consuls, Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro, furiously marched their armies south to face him. After 2 days of marching, they found Hannibal camped near the Aufidus River and set up their own camp about 5 miles away on the opposite bank. For the next 2 days, both armies remained in place, each waiting for the other to make a move. Them Romans always had two consuls, a precautionary measure rooted in their fear of any one individual becoming too powerful and declaring himself king. The interesting thing is, Paulus and Varro were as different as day and night. Paulus, ever the cautious strategist, preferred to nibble away at Hannibal's forces by harassing his supply lines and weakening his army gradually. On the other hand, Varro, with his fiery impatience, was eager for a decisive clash. This stark contrast between the two consuls set the stage for tension and indecision. The two consuls, in a peculiar arrangement, alternated command on a daily basis. While their pairing and rotating leadership is intended to balance power and prevent any single individual from becoming too dominant, it also created a situation ripe for conflict and confusion at crucial moments. The combination of Paulus's calculated strategy and Varro's impulsive nature was bound to make for a volatile leadership dynamic. Hannibal, ever the shrewd tactician, used his network of spies and scouts to gain invaluable insights into Roman movements, troop morale, and weaknesses. He seemed to have an uncanny ability to know exactly who was in command on any given day, allowing him to predict Roman actions with impressive accuracy. On one of Paulus's days, Hannibal seized the opportunity to offer battle, but the cautious consul declined the challenge. Frustrated, Hannibal sent his light cavalry, the Numidians, to harass the Romans. These nimble javelin throwers targeted the Roman water supplies, creating considerable discomfort for the Roman camp. As the next day arrived, a Varro day, the aggressive consul, eager for action, led the Roman army, which numbered around 80,000 to 87,000 strong, into battle. Hannibal, strategically positioned near the Aufidus River, ensured his forces had access to water and prepared to force the Romans into a constrained and disadvantageous battlefield. Varro, with a singular focus on fighting, arranged his army in a massive block formation on one side of the river, determined to make this day count and eager to engage Hannibal without further delay. The Romans, accustomed to imposing their will through sheer force, had built their empire on the back of relentless legions. Typically, they marched into battle with a solid formation of 4 legions of infantry, bolstered by an equal number of allied troops. This robust lineup had served them well against most adversaries. But Hannibal, well, he was no ordinary foe. Determined to end Hannibal's relentless threat once and for all, the Romans decided to go all in. They assembled the largest army they had ever fielded, 8 legions. And these weren't your run-of-the-mill legions. Each was beefed up to 5,000 infantry, compared to the usual 4,000, and the cavalry was increased from 200 to 300 per legion. The allies pitched in too, contributing additional cavalry, bringing the total to a formidable 6,000. On the battlefield, the Romans and their allies formed up in their usual dense formation, an imposing line stretching across the plain. The cavalry was arrayed on the wings, with the weaker Roman cavalry on the left, and the stronger allied cavalry on the right. Varro positioned the Hastati in the front, the Principes in the second line, and the Triarii in reserve. But there was a monumental problem managing such a vast army. With their lines stretching nearly 2 kilometers wide, communication across the battlefield was a nightmare. A trumpet blast or a waving banner would barely reach the far ends of such a sprawling formation. Sending runners would take ages in the heat of battle, and in the chaos of battle, such delays could be disastrous. This lack of communication and control was their Achilles' heel for the Romans. They probably figured a simple plan was their best bet. All they had to do was charge headfirst into the enemy. After all, they outnumbered Hannibal 2-1, right? Easy win, or so they thought. Knowing full well that the Romans favored a direct, head-on assault, Hannibal set the stage for a classic trap. He concealed his strongest troops, veteran Libyan and Carthaginian spearmen, behind a slight rise or a hedgerow, making them virtually invisible to the Romans. Meanwhile, his Spanish slingers provided a steady barrage of projectiles from behind his lines, disrupting the Roman advance and sowing chaos. In the heart of his formation, Hannibal arranged his African infantry in a disciplined phalanx-like formation. They fought with spears and short swords, their large shields and helmets reminiscent of Roman equipment, which they had captured from previous engagements. These troops were reliable and well-organized, forming a solid core. Flanking this core were his Gallic and Iberian troops. The Gauls and Iberians, though less experienced and lightly armored compared to their African counterparts, brought a fierce combat prowess to the battlefield. Equipped with long swords, javelins, and round shields, they were known for their agility and aggression. Like most armies of those days, on the flanks of his infantry, Hannibal positioned his cavalry, totaling around 10,000 men. To the right, he deployed his Numidian light cavalry. Swift and agile, they were armed with javelins and small shields, but wore no armor. Their role was to harass the Roman flanks with hit-and-run tactics, creating further disarray. To the left, Hannibal placed his heavier cavalry, composed of Spanish and Gallic horsemen. These troops, equipped with long spears and shields, formed the shock element of his flanking force. The flat plains of Cannae suited Roman tactics, which heavily relied on their infantry formations. However, Hannibal used this to his advantage. While the vast open spaces usually played to Rome's strength, they allowed Hannibal's smaller, more agile force to execute his carefully crafted plan. Hannibal's tactical genius further emerged as he positioned his army to face the harsh, dry winds of southern Italy. These winds whipped up dust clouds that filled the Roman ranks with grit and discomfort. This subtle yet effective tactic wore down the Romans even before the battle commenced, making their already challenging situation even more unbearable. Here's where Hannibal's brilliance truly came to the forefront. His army's center line wasn't perfectly straight. It bulged outward in a crescent shape. Whether this was a deliberate element of Hannibal's grand strategy or a shift caused by eager Gauls, the bulge became a crucial component of his trap. To add another layer of confusion, Hannibal's troops, dressed in looted Roman armor and shields from previous victories, looked remarkably similar to their Roman adversaries from a distance. The battle began with a fierce cavalry fight on both flanks. On the Carthaginian right, the Numidian cavalry, known for their agility and skill, harassed the Roman cavalry, while the heavier Carthaginian cavalry on the left decisively routed their Roman counterparts. The Roman commanders failed to effectively protect their cavalry, leaving them exposed. Instead of pursuing the fleeing Romans immediately, Hannibal's cavalry regrouped to prepare for the next phase of the battle. Meanwhile, light infantry on both sides exchanged volleys of javelins, obscuring the movements of the main armies in a cloud of dust. As the infantry advanced, they contended with gusts of wind that blew dust into their eyes, further impairing their vision. The psychological toll on the Romans was compounded by Hannibal's earlier attacks on their camp, which had already worn them down with fatigue and thirst. The real battle intensified when the heavy infantry met. The Romans charged the center, hitting the bulge formed by Spanish and Gaulish warriors. Despite fierce resistance, the Romans slowly pushed the Carthaginian center back. The Romans fielded their army in a deep, narrow formation to apply maximum pressure on the Carthaginian center. This depth allowed them to push forward with immense force, but it also meant that the Romans had little flexibility to react to changes on the battlefield. As the Romans pushed forward, Hannibal's center began to give way, slowly falling back under the weight of the Roman advance. This was exactly what Hannibal intended. The Roman commanders, convinced of victory, pressed harder, driving deeper into the Carthaginian formation. But as the center continued to retreat, Hannibal's African infantry on the flanks remained steadfast, holding their ground. The Roman commanders, believing victory was within their grasp, charged forward, unaware of the impending trap. At a crucial moment, Hannibal signaled his troops. The Carthaginian wings, comprising both cavalry and infantry, began to encircle the Romans. The African infantry, disciplined and experienced, pivoted inward, closing in on the Roman flanks like the jaws of a trap. Meanwhile, the Numidian cavalry, having routed the Roman cavalry, swung around to attack the Roman rear. Panic erupted as the realization of being trapped spread through the Roman ranks. The dense Roman formation, designed for a frontal assault, now became a lethal trap with no room to maneuver or retreat. Hannibal's elite Libyan infantry, who had held back until this point, now turned to assault the Roman sides. The sight of Carthaginian soldiers in Roman armor only heightened the confusion. The Numidian cavalry continued to harass the Roman allied cavalry, preventing them from joining the battle. With the Carthaginian flank's arrival, the Roman allied cavalry lost hope and fled. The combination of chaos, dust, heat, and the terror of encirclement led to a complete collapse in Roman morale. The result was a massacre. Hannibal's troops, particularly the African infantry, systematically slaughtered the trapped Romans. Estimates suggest up to 70,000 Romans perished, including a significant portion of the Roman aristocracy and military leadership, such as Consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus. The exact number of casualties remains debated, but the Roman losses were catastrophic. Some Romans resorted to suffocating themselves in self-dug pits, and the killing continued at a grim rate of nearly 600 per minute until darkness fell. Of the Roman and allied foot soldiers, around 10,000 were taken captive, while only 3,000 survived. Cannae was a disaster of unprecedented scale for Rome. The sheer scale of the defeat pushed Rome to the brink of annihilation, a concept it had not previously had to confront so directly.